With that being said, I would like to ask Mr. Eriwn Salkin to please say a few words.
Thank you, Rabbi Gluck. As Rabbi Gluck told you, my name is Eriwn Salkin. I'm a lawyer. I live in San Diego, but I practice all over the country. We represent victims of childhood sexual abuse throughout the United States, primarily against institutions that are somehow involved in either harboring the pedophiles or in covering up institutional knowledge. So Rabbi Gluck said he's come here with a heavy heart. I actually am coming here with a great sense of encouragement. I think it's absolutely amazing and wonderful that this has been put together, this event, this evening, this afternoon has been put together for the purpose of discussing this problem. Problem in our society, and it's not endemic to just ultra-Orthodox Jews. This is across the board with Catholics. We just had a big case involving Jehovah's Witnesses in San Diego, Episcopals, Baptists, Boy Scouts, institutions like the YMCA and others. This is not just an ultra-Orthodox problem. It's percolating to the surface here now. So it's become an issue that's somewhat on the forefront. But it's not one limited to this community. But it is a problem that needs to be addressed more publicly. If we keep this quiet, if it's a shanda, don't talk about it, it's going to fester. It's going to be a wound that becomes like a cancer. And at some point, it will destroy the community. So it's important that we address the problem now and deal with it head on. So what's the problem? What is the problem we're talking about? It is an epidemic, in my point of view. The abuse of a child is one of the worst possible injuries you can inflict on a child. We know that it causes biochemical and neurological changes to the brain. We know that it will result in a lifelong history of substance abuse, inability to maintain a meaningful and trusting relationship, problems with work and focus and authority figures, acting out. Some portion of victims will end up in the criminal justice system. We know that it will cost society well over $250,000 per victim. We know from the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect that there are some 9 million children a year that are abused. 9 million children a year. Can you imagine that number? And that's what's being reported. And we also know that most victims do not report. Most children don't report. This is an insidious problem that needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be dealt with immediately. So what's the problem? The problem is scandal. The problem is when it comes to institutions, when it comes to religion, when it comes to the Boy Scouts, no matter what it is, the problem is nobody wants scandal. And to expose such a problem invites scandal. And the first reaction is to keep this out of the public eye, to avoid scandal. When you have a policy, when you start with that premise, you're going down a very slippery slope, because ultimately you can't avoid it. And ultimately it's going to look worse, and it is going to be worse for institutions that do cover it up. So this is the problem that we have to deal with, and this is the problem that had plagued, for example, the Catholic Church. When we got involved with these cases, the Catholic Church has known about this problem for centuries. This is child abuse among priests and other religious within the Catholic clergy has been going on for centuries. It first gained national prominence in 1985 when there was a prosecution, a criminal prosecution, and that's why I'm glad to see District Attorney Charles Hines here, because it's the criminal justice system that can be of significant importance in affecting policy change through the criminal prosecution of cases. And it was exactly that in 1985 when a priest in Louisiana diocese, one of the Louisiana dioceses, was prosecuted for the abuse of 5 victims. The press and the media started to pick up on that, and in 1985, a father, Thomas Doyle, I don't know if anybody here has ever met Tom Doyle, but I've gotten to know him well, was a canon lawyer who was very involved with the Vatican Nuncio, which is the diplomatic representative, essentially the embassy of the Vatican in Washington, D.C. He worked in the Vatican, and his job was to deal with these problem priests. He was the one who was running around the country troubleshooting these issues. And he and two others prepared what's known as the Doyle Report and presented it to the then National Conference of Catholic Bishops. And he said, if we don't do something, we Catholic bishops of the United States do not do something about this problem, it will be a billion-dollar problem financially to us. For his troubles, he was sent to Germany and made a military chaplain on an Air Force base in Germany. This has been a much more than $1 billion problem to the Catholic Church. In California alone, we filed 1,000 lawsuits in 2003 when we had a change in our statute of limitations that has resulted in well over $1 billion in judgments and settlements that they've had to pay. We've had upwards of 9 major dioceses in this country file bankruptcy. In San Diego, the San Diego Diocese was the biggest diocese to ever file a bankruptcy, and for their troubles, it cost them $200 million in settlements for 144 million. It can be a very costly problem if it's not dealt with, and dealt with immediately. The Catholic Church and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops put together several conferences on the subject. They initiated a program called, the equivalent of canon law, called the Charter for Protection of Children and Young People. And in that charter, they mandated what every diocese has to do to try to prevent this problem, to detect the problem, and to respond to the problem. The problem is, somebody has to take it seriously. You can't just make policy changes and just hope that they work. There has to be an enforcement arm to the policy changes. There has to be someone who makes sure that these policies are being implemented. And unfortunately, the policy that these institutions seem to understand best is the policy of economics. Once it starts costing them money, that's when the policies start becoming effective, is when they know it's going to cost them money in civil litigation. But in 2003, the Vatican held a conference. They had 8 non-Catholic psychiatrists address the problem, and they pointed out there were 5 reasons they felt that they ended up in the situation they were in. The first was the failure of the hierarchy within the institution to grasp the seriousness of the problem. The second was an overemphasis on the avoidance of scandal. The third was using insular treatment centers. In other words, they would send problem priests to very insular Catholic treatment centers, never to the public institutions or university hospitals or private psychiatrists. They kept it all in-house. The fourth was an over-willingness to forgive and turn a blind eye. To believe that somehow, if you forgive and forget, it'll go away. And that the first step to healing is forgiveness, and they disregard what it means to victims. One of the biggest problems for a victim is the sense that they're not taken seriously, that it's not somehow, this is not a problem that people really understood, and no one is, and the people who are involved have not been held accountable. And if you ask a victim to just forgive and forget, it's something that actually in some ways compounds the problem. There needs to be some sense of vindication. There needs to be some sense that their problem is real, that there is somebody held accountable for what's happened to them, and their problem is a real problem. It's not so easily forgotten. And finally, this problem of insufficient accountability. At least when it comes to helping a victim and helping victims, we as a society have to take a responsibility and be accountable. Institutions that have this problem have to fess up to the problem and look to how do I help the victims now, more than how do I protect myself. The issue is not to protect yourself. The issue is how do I help the people that have been hurt. If you help the people that have been hurt, you will help yourself as an institution. That is the kind of mindset that will change policy, that will help and eliminate or at least mitigate this very, very, very difficult problem. There are a number of organizations that are involved in providing programs, and one of the things that I think is important is people ask me all the time, well, what can we do? Where do we turn as an institution, as an organization? Where do we go to learn how to prevent this problem, how to detect the problem, how to respond to the problem? There are resources available, and I'd like to just name a few if any of you are interested and want to take this information down, or I can give it to you afterwards. One is the National Child Protection Training Center. It's out of Winona State University. Great organization. They actually train a lot of prosecutors, but they do have programs for almost any kind of institution. And let me tell you, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. There isn't, because so much depends on the organization itself, how it's structured. Does it have employees, volunteers? How much are they with children? That sort of thing. So it really varies from institution to institution, and these organizations help. Darkness to Light is another one. The first one in the country was the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. They started in 1875. It was the first organization of its kind in the world, as far as I know. And the Humane Society of America is another one. But we can talk about that on the side if any of you have any questions. If you have any, are we doing questions
yes.
At this point?
Yeah, no.
Or are we doing them at the end?
At the end.
After. Okay, I think I've taken enough of your time. Thank you.